So welcome everyone to our second Zoom meeting for our Ancient Gemstones KAL. I'm delighted to be back and going to get a chance to see what everybody is doing. If you're wanting to be showing off things, we will be able to talk about finishing the shawl and a little bit of tips and tricks in terms of blocking and the cast off. And then we're going to talk about styling the shawl and so on. So we'll start the meeting with everybody muted, but we are going to have a lot more chance for asking questions and chatting and doing the show and tells in this particular Zoom, because let's face it, part of the fun of a KAL is to see what everybody else is doing and how far along they are. So we will begin with things on mute. It's easy for us to be able to spotlight you when it comes time to share your work. If you want to just put your hand up in the corner of your screen, so you'll just click the little hands up button, or in my case, if I hold my hand up like that for a bit, the thing will actually automatically put my hand up whether I want it to or not. And being a person who likes to talk with their hands, that can be kind of entertaining. So yeah, we'll have you put your hand up and then we'll just go through each person in turn, and you'll be able to share your shawl and we'll all be able to admire them. The other thing is just for anybody who's still joining right now, and we do have people who are continually popping in, continuing rather to pop in, continually, yeah, nice. We are recording the event, so if you would prefer not to be on camera, then just turn off your video, and that's just fine, because not all of us always want to show. My lovely and talented spouse, for example, never shows his face, and you know, it is what it is. Alrighty, so with that in mind, the other thing that we'll do at some point tonight is we are going to do a prize draw, because what would an Ancient Arts Zoom session be without a prize draw? And so the prize tonight will be a gnome kit of your choice from our in-stock gnome kits. There is another Imagine Landscapes Gnome KAL coming up, and so we have some really interesting kits this time for that, because we have moved to a different yarn base. So Nochi the gnome, who apparently is quite the chef, it has her own special set of gnome kits. And what we've done is we've chosen our Lasco fine yarn base for these kits, because if you feel adventurous, Nochi is going to be done with some color work as part of the pattern and design. So this is an ideal yarn for doing color work. And if you're like me and you're a little bit uncertain about color work in the round or in smaller pieces, this yarn is going to hold your hand through the process, because it is designed to make color work easy and fun. So that's one of the reasons why we have that yarn base for this particular gnome, and that's one of the reasons why we'll be using that for our giveaway, so that you can have a chance to win a gnome kit and try something different. For those who are old hands at stranded color work, you'll just be able to enjoy a base that will, you know, work along with you. And of course, for those who win, whoever wins the kit, if you don't want to do stranded color work on this next knit along, Sarah is very, very smart, and she has made this gnome non-color work friendly as well. So you just don't have to do the color work elements of the design, and Nochi will still be adorable and be showing off in her latest Netflix series. I think it's Netflix. Anyway, so there will be a prize draw at some point in time here, and it will be drawn from among the people who are actually in the session, so that we can arrange with you on how to get your prize to you and so on. All right, so that then completes our housekeeping review of what we're going to be doing here and gives you a little bit of structure. And so to start, what we'll do is we'll just simply say a few little bits for people who have joined the KAL after the start. So the way that this is working is that Interweave, who is hosting the KAL in partnership with Ancient Arts Fiber Crafts and the one and only Xiaogu Needles, has set up a whole lot of really helpful things for you to help you along the way. So they have newsletters that go out each week for people who signed up on the KAL. And if you haven't received the newsletters, or you've lost the newsletters, or you started after the newsletters started being sent, they're also posting them in the form of blog posts on their website. So you'll be able to find all the information that way, all the text that went out in the newsletters. And they also have a number of really great YouTube videos set up to help you along with things like learning the star stitch and the slip stitch parts of the shawl. I do know that the very clever and talented Carrie has also prepared for you things like some of what we'll go over tonight, for example, shawl styling, and she's going to be talking a little bit about, again, some of the things that we'll talk about tonight, which is shawl shapes, so that you get, a really nice, well-rounded view of what to do with the shawl and how to finish the shawl and so on. But we did want to go through some of that too, because sometimes it's nice to be able to ask a question of a living person wrapping a shawl around their neck as opposed to looking at static photos. Because I will admit that in my years of shawl wearing, I have gone online and looked for other ideas on how to style them and gone, I have no idea how that girl has turned this into an adorable, cute top, but more power to her. Although let's face it, at my age, it probably wouldn't suit me anyway to have this like nice bustier thing. Some of us prefer a little bit more, shall we say, okay, blanking out on the words, but we're just not that adventurous. Anyway, so remember that you do have those resources, and I did leave up on our social media an abbreviated version of how to work a star stitch, so that if you prefer not to watch longer YouTube videos, you can go to our social media and find that reel, which will help you with star stitch as well. If you guys are having trouble, there is a fabulous forum that is free, and it's on Interweave Plus. All you have to do is set up a free Interweave account, and then you can post and comment and so on that forum. But even if you don't have an account, you can go to it and you can read the various different posts and so on. And it's a very active community, and there's a lot of really helpful people there. So if you have questions or concerns or just want to see what other people are doing, it's another great venue for you to go and check things out. Last but not least, there is a hashtag for you to post on social media, and that is hashtag Ancient Gemstones KAL. So you can post your progress there and see other people's progress and what kind of colors they've chosen and so on. So I've been having a lot of fun, oh, look, it's lunch hour. Let's sneak into the social media and see what shawls are popping up there. And then, drooling over them and wishing I had chosen other colors, although I am pretty happy with mine. So yeah, when you need a review, when you need a refresher, if you're having, some confusion on techniques, those are the places that you can go to find them. So now I thought it would be kind of fun, and this was also a staff favorite suggestion, to just talk a little bit about shawl shapes, because this is a triangle shawl that we're making here. And by the way, I'm going to be waving around the finished shawl by our very own Wendy, which is absolutely stunning, and I cannot take any credit for myself. This is a triangular shawl, and the shape of a triangular shawl can vary quite a bit. Let me turn it around so that you can see the right side. The wrong side is actually just as pretty. Look at the beautiful stripes on there. Let's hold that still. And then the right side, you'll see the star stitches and the flex. But I think it's a really brilliantly designed shawl because it does have a rather two-sided element to it, in that it is really, really lovely. Anyway, it is a triangular shawl, and triangular shawls actually come in all sorts of different shapes. So I just wanted to show you a few options there so that we could have a little bit of depth in terms of how shawls are constructed. This is something that I am super fascinated by myself, and I have throughout the career of shawl knitting and designing played with a lot of these. So I just grabbed a few screenshots from general Googling about shawl shapes, and you can find all of these really easy online. And Knitting Today has some really cute little summaries about shawl shapes here. So you can see the top row, they're all technically triangle shawls, but they all have a different construction and a different shape. And while it may seem a bit demented to do this, they actually all have different purposes because the stitches will flow through them differently. So let's just look at a couple of other references here. So this one in particular, I like this bottom box here as well as the top, because you can see some really wild shaped triangle shawls. So they all have a few things in common in terms of they are made in a triangular shape and they're done by increasing stitches. But the placement of where the stitches are increased can differ, and the rate at which you increase to build your shawl can differ. So the one up at the top is actually the same construction as the shawl that we are making for this KAL, but the increases on it are significantly greater, which causes a long skinny shape instead of the more usable triangle that we are making currently. Some of the ones in the bottom there, the top row, those are actually symmetrical triangle shapes, and they'll be formed in quite traditional ways with increases along each edge and sometimes the increases will go down the center spine. So sometimes they're very subtle and they'll be done with like a knit one front and back. And sometimes they might be a lot more elaborate and include things like yarn overs so that you get a nice lacy spine on your shawl. Those ones will have the stitches flowing out from the spine, and they will not look the same as the shawl that we are knitting because the stitch directions move differently. Then you get some that are done with different rates of increases, and they will form long, skinny wings. So you see those lower rows there where you see the various different types of wings and different angles on those wings. And you can use those if you're trying to make a smaller shawl. So for example, say a one skein shawl, but you kind of want to get it long enough to wrap a couple of times around your neck. So that one on the left down from the perfect triangle is a really great one skein shawl shape because it'll give you a lot of bang for your buck in terms of wearability. If you went with a plain regular triangle, you get a very small shawl that ends up being more of, say, a kerchief in terms of wearing. So sometimes designers will work with these different shawl shapes and these different amounts of increases to change the wearability or the functionality of the yarn. Sometimes they just do it because they're a lot of fun too. One of the ones that really intrigues me in this diagram too is the Faroese shawl, and they also will call it a spline pattern. And that's in the bottom row on the left, and it has the two wings with that center rectangle. That one's a really clever shaping for a shawl because it increases in two places down the center and gives you a rectangular section in the middle. And the reason that the Faroese shawls are designed like that is that it helps you to keep the shawl on your shoulders when you're moving around vigorously. So some shawl shapes are really cool and really interesting, and the moment that you try and move, they fall right off again. I don't quite understand that heart shape there because to me, that's almost completely unwearable, but you will get a heart shape where instead of the points curling in like that, they'll radiate up. Let me see, I think we had that one on here. Yeah, so the top left-hand corner, that's a more common batwing type shawl than this one. So heart-shaped and batwing, you can sometimes see those terms used interchangeably. And this is a really cute thing you can find on Ravelry. And this is an amazing book. If you're totally into knowing how shawls are shaped and constructed, she has something like 400 different shawl shaping recipes in this book. I'd love to meet the author sometime because she has just about as analytical a mind as you can get, and I love it. And this is a series of photos of various different shawl constructions. And along the right-hand side, you can see some of the shapes that we saw there in just pure drawn form, but you can also see where the increases are happening. So you can see that normal, proper, center increase triangle that a lot of us are familiar with, both second down and then fourth down. The difference between the one that's second down in the right-hand column and the one that's fourth down is that there is a different rate of increase in those two shawls. So the one that is fourth down is increasing more rapidly than the one that is second down. You can also see the start of a heart shape in the shawl that is third down on the right-hand side there. And then you can see the type of shawl that we're knitting, which is an asymmetric triangle, fifth down. And then you can see how changing where your increases and so on happen can really change the shape of your shawl. And it gets really intriguing as a designer because you can start doing some really funky things with stitches and how the stitches flow. So that's just a small sampling of different types of triangle shawls, but it gives you an idea that they can come in different shapes and sizes. And sometimes you'll make different shapes of shawls, like I say, in order to maximize the amount of yarn that you're using and get lots and lots of wrap around your neck. Sometimes they'll be done because you're trying to move the direction of the stitches. So your traditional top-down triangle shawl will have a predictable flow of stitches radiating out from the center spine. But you could also make that shape, and I have played with this myself in terms of my journey shawl, where it will be done like an asymmetric triangle, but it can flow into another wing, which means that instead of the stitches flowing down, they actually flow across. So it means that when you put different stitch patterns in there, they look differently when you wear them. So this is one of the reasons for a lot of different shapes like this. One of the most user-friendly in terms of knitting them and designing them is the style that we are knitting in this KAL. So that shawl shape is one that lends itself to easily developing charts for them and summarizing how they're written. Having designed things called asymmetric bias shawls, that's a whole different kettle of fish because that will actually increase on one edge and decrease on the other edge, which puts a curve in that triangle. Now, those are really great because when you wear them, they stay on your shoulders really nicely. But in terms of designability, they can be a real challenge and result in your 20-page long pattern. Super fun though, because you can play with how the stitches will appear when they're finished. And you can see an absolutely gorgeous example of an asymmetric bias shawl if you go to Aroha Knits and look at some of her shawl shapes. So she does use the asymmetric bias triangle. And I have designed one myself, which is called Monument Valley. And it's actually a cheater because it's an asymmetric bias triangle until you reach the final lace pattern. And then it becomes a triangle shawl shape like the one we have. And that just made it simpler for knitters to work the lace instead of having so much fiddle faddle, as my mother would have called it, on the edges. So yeah, Roha Knits has some really beautiful examples, and they're very delicate and graceful, and she does some really lovely work. There are many, many designers who use those, but it's always nice to point out a designer that, you know her work is good and her patterns are well written. So this particular shawl just increases along one edge, as I'm sure you've all found out right now, and that does give you a bit of an asymmetry to it. So it's not a perfect triangle the way that you would get if you have that center spine increase. And what that does is it gives you a lot of interesting ways that you can wear the shawl. And again, it gives you interesting ways to handle stitch patterns, but make them very, very knittable. So that's a little bit about the shaping of the shawls and a little bit about why Lana would have chosen this particular style, is that it meant that she could make this very beginner friendly, because with only one increase to be worrying about, you only have one chart for each section, no matter where you are in the shawl, for that particular stitch. If she'd used a different type of shawl shaping, so your traditional triangle with the flat top and the increase down the center spine, she would have had to change the charts throughout, and it would have been a lot more complicated. So as a knitter, if you are a beginner in shawls, look for those asymmetric triangles, which is just one increase along the edge, and you will find that they are easier to knit because you're not worrying about what's going on two edges. The downside as a knitter to an asymmetric bias shawl that incorporates a curve in that triangle is you do have to pay attention to what happens on both edges, because things occur, and if you get it wrong, all of a sudden your shawl starts heading off in the wrong direction. And I can tell you that if you get mixed up, you can make some really serious modern art, but you will end up having to think back. So yeah, that is the reason for that. And like I say, it's a very wearable style too. There's another one that I really enjoy the work of, and she uses all asymmetric triangles most of the time, and that's Lisa Haynes, Haynes. So I've knit a fair number of her shawls and really enjoyed them. And she always has the same recipe, which means as a knitter, you're not trying to figure out your shawl shaping, but then she puts in all sorts of really interesting things like cables and, various different slip stitch patterns. So take a look at her work too if you enjoyed knitting this shape, because it's a place to go now that you've got these, basic concepts in mind. So before I move on to demonstrating a little bit about the cast off, because I thought that would be a good idea to give you if you're a little less experienced at these sorts of shawls, do you guys have any questions? This would be a good chance to ask. So just feel free to unmute and ask.
Who was the first designer that you just mentioned?
It's a Rohan.
Before.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so AROHA. Heather, would you mind finding a link and popping it into the chat for people? I, of course, can only remember her nickname. Her nickname is Frenchy, but she has a real name. And like I say, she's a really, really interesting designer. She has some Maori background, and more of her recent work involves bringing that cultural background and stylistic influence into her work. But like I say, they're very, very knittable, and she does use some really interesting shawl shapes. Are there any other questions? Do you want any reviews on techniques that we used earlier in the shawl? Yes, Francois Danoy. Thank you, Teresa. Perfect. So you can find her on social media, by the way, and of course she is on Ravelry, but I know she sells her patterns now through other sites as well. So yeah, definitely. I always like to recommend designers that I have knit multiple patterns from, and that I, can say to you confidently, you will be in good hands with that designer. So yeah, the other one, like I say, is Lisa Haynes. Alrighty, so one of the things that I thought would be useful is that we will approach the end of this shawl. And by the way, just to remind you, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Just to remind you, you don't have to finish this shawl by the end of the KAL in order to be eligible for things like the prizes and so on. So this is just, you know, proactive. We're going to get there eventually. We'll be binding off, and not everyone is familiar with the type of bind off that's used in this shawl. So this is a nice little Pico bind off. It has a little bit of flexibility to it because of the picos, but it also gives you a reasonably strong edge on the bind off end. And picos, they can be done in all sorts of different ways. They can have great big narbly bits. They can be really spaced out. They can be really close together, but it is an interesting decorative bind off that I think in this one really enhances the texture elements and the star stitch in this particular shawl. So without further ado, oh my God, actually, Wendy, why don't you pop on and tell people about your beautiful shawl and the color inspiration, because I have to just run and get my notes on doing this bind off, or I'm going to show you the wrong number of stitches because I've designed Pico bind offs and they're different numbers. One moment.
Okay. Oh, well, I was trying to come up with a color scheme for this shawl, and I happen to be in my dining room where there's a hibiscus plant that's about 6 feet tall that I've had for years, and its parent plant's been in my family for about 30 years. And I thought, those are colors I've never knit before. I'd like to commemorate this plant. So those are the colors that I picked. It's champagne is this one. It's got a slight pink undertone. The old growth forest for the leaves, and the color is called hibiscus for the hibiscus flowers. And if you've seen my social media, I took a picture of my finished shawl next to a blossom or a bloom that was big and beautiful yesterday morning. The thing about hibiscus is the flowers will bloom and die in 24 hours. Oh, there. Thank you, Caroline. That's it. That flower is now dead, and there's 2 flowers on the other side that you can't see, but
I just thought it was such a clever way to come up with colors for this that I really wanted Wendy to be able to share it. Plus the shawl is really beautiful, and I'm kind of thinking of running away with it overnight and I won't know anything about it. Also, Zoom bombing by Sprite. You could move your little butt. Yeah, I know you're very cute, but you know what? We're busy. Okay, so I have my pattern here, so I'm not going to teach you to do like giant weird picos or anything like that. I can show you the Pico bind off that you'll be using in this particular pattern. So it starts off when you get to the row where it's actually going to be happening, and it says right side facing. I've just done a little swatch of garter stitch, so don't worry about that. You know, you're going to have your right side facing when you go to do this bind off because you'll have prepared a row for it. And then what you're going to do is, it says with right side facing, bind off all stitches as follows. Bind off 2 stitches. So that's just your regular plain old simple bind off. That's basically kind of like a knitted bind off. So I'm going to bind off 2 stitches. So what we do is we knit 2. Let's see if I'm actually under this camera, and if you can spotlight this small camera, Dan. And is that spotlighted? It looks like it. Okay. So now if it will just cooperate and focus. So once we have 2 stitches on our right hand needle, then we can just take the left hand needle and pop the first one over the second one. And when you do this, make sure you don't pull really tightly if you're not used to doing bind offs, because then you get a very tight bind off. Just keep them at the same sort of tension that you normally would when you were knitting, because then you'll get a nice even bind off where the stitches are about the same length as the width of a stitch in the main garment. So the next thing that it says is transfer 1 stitch from right needle to left needle. So this stitch that we have left over after binding off 2 left hand needle. So there it is, sitting there in all of its bound off glory on the left hand needle. Then it says, using the backward loop method, cast on 1 stitch to the left needle. So some people are going to be saying, what on earth is a backwards loop cast on? This is where you just take your finger, put it underneath your working yarn, and make a loop so that the yarn crosses over itself. So is that nice and clear that you can see that? And then just pop that onto your needle and snug it up into a regular stitch. So that's a backwards loop. Let me just repeat that for those of you who aren't used to doing this. Okay, just one second here. There. So you put your finger under the yarn. You just make a loop with it so that the yarn is crossing underneath. See that? Holding it steady. And then we just pop it onto the next left needle and we snug it up. Whoops, I did it wrong. So when you make your loop, that's actually really handy that I did it wrong, because now I can tell you the way that you need to pop it on. You're going to turn it to the right so that it faces to the right and pop it onto the needle. Then you have a loop around there. However you get a loop that stays on your needle is really the right way to do it. The reason why they call it backwards is because you turn it to the back and flip it on. If you're doing this by casting onto the right-hand needle, it's still the same thing, but it's actually the mirror image. If you absolutely hate doing a backwards loop cast on for a single stitch, you can also cast on a single stitch for a Pico Bind Off by just doing the knitted cast on. So if you just do a knit and put it on there, it's not going to make any difference. The reason why a backwards loop is put into a Pico Bind Off is that it's often faster once you really get going, but you can do either one and it's not going to harm the look of your Pico. So we'll go back to the backwards loop, pop it onto the needle, snug it up. And now what the instructions say is bind off 4 stitches. So you're going to bind off just by doing exactly what we did before. Come on, you get in there. Checking to make sure I'm under the camera. Knit 2, pass the first stitch over. Then you notice this big long gap here between the two. When we go to do our third, pass the stitch over, there's a purpose for that gap. And what this does is it puts some ease into your bind off. So we'll bind off the 4th stitch. And then we have a little nubbin here. And so what that does is it puts some stretchiness into the edge of your shawl. Let's get this to focus. There we go. This puts some stretch into the edge of your shawl and gives you a nice little decorative element at the same time. So you can now stretch it out and the Pico will go flat, or you can let it relax to its normal elasticity point and you just have a nice little Pico. So when we look at Wendy's beautiful shawl, you can see exactly that showing up here with the little loops and those little holes there. And Wendy mentioned something that I thought was really clever. She said, if you're using blocking wires to block your shawl at the end, it's the perfect little hole to run your wires through or to put a pin in. And you can just block based on that. You don't have to go and try and figure out where to put your blocking wire or your pins. So a nice little way to do it. It's also nice when you're blocking an edge that has a Pico to actually pull those little Picos out in the blocking. So when we are continuing our Pico Bind Off, the rest of the instruction says repeat from the star to the end. So we go back to the transfer 1 stitch from right needle to left. So we're not going to do another 2 stitches in this bind off and then start our whole 4 stitch thing. We're just going to start from where it says transfer the stitch, because that's where our asterisk is. And so at this point in time, see how quick and easy that is to just throw that loop on there. That's why they use a backwards loop to do this. And then we're going to bind off 4 stitches again. Hopefully I'm not moving too fast for the camera to keep up here. Looks all right. Bind off. 3, and then we get to 4. Now Pico bind offs can vary in terms of how many stitches in between the Picos and how many stitches construct the Pico as well. This one is quite close together, but the Pico itself, let's move that out from underneath. See now how we have 2 Pico bumps here? Bump number 1, bump number 2. Nice decorative edge, but again, it allows a lot of stretching. When you're binding off the edge of a shawl, one of the things that's always an issue is stretchiness. And so this gives you stretchiness and decoration at the same time, because it really goes boing, but it snaps back. Anyway, you can have, just for people who are curious about this, much bigger Picos, and what you would do is instead of adding 1 stitch with that backwards loop, you could add anywhere between 1 to say 6, and then you would bind them all off and then you get a much taller Pico. You can also vary the distance in between them. So for example, instead of doing 4, then maybe you would do 6, and then your picots are more spaced. Yeah, that's a good question, Karen. Would you recommend going up a needle size to do this? If you find that you tend to bind off really, really tightly, so if you're a person who likes to give those stitches a good tug as you're binding off, going up a needle size can absolutely help to keep the size of the stitches just that little bit easier and a little bit larger, so that it is in the end not going to be pulling in the bottom edge of your shawl, bottom edge being the widest end. So excellent question, Karen. And it's all about personal knowledge of how you knit. If you find as you're binding this off that it's pinching in, then definitely go up a needle size, or even 2 sometimes. The other sneaky little thing that I'll do with a bind off like this is that I got my circular needle and I'm like, oh my God, there's a ton of stitches on here and it's really heavy and my hands are getting tired. So I'll go grab a DPN. So like a 6-inch sock needle or sleeve needle, and I'll do my bind off with that. As long as it's the same size as the other needle, then you have this one stretched out to the side. You can set the weight down to the side, and then you can just use the DPN to do your cast off. So I do that a lot. I-cord bind offs and Pico bind offs, and even regular bind offs of all sorts of different types. Definitely, it makes it easier to do. If you are a person who loathes and despises the delightful Pico, and there are some of you out there, at times I hate Pico bind offs myself, and at times I love them dearly. So it's like whatever my mood is at the time. You could pass on doing the Pico bind off and just do a normal stretchy one. So one of the easiest ones to do in terms of a stretchy bind off that isn't going to make the edge of your shawl ripple and bulge is a simple one where you are just going to knit 2 through the back loop. And then you're actually going to pass that stitch back onto the left-hand needle and just keep on doing that. So there's 2 advantages to this particular bind off. Well, actually 3 if you want to think about it. Again, a DPN would be so much easier here because my cable on this set of needles is quite short and it's kind of annoying me. So this does not give you those pretty picots that you see here on the right-hand side. But what it is giving you is a really nice, smooth, almost rolled edge. So it's quite nice and decorative, and it has more elasticity than a normal bind off. So this is a great one for the bottom edge of a shawl like this, where you want it to have some elasticity, but you don't want it to be saggy, floppy, or to ripple. This is a good one too. Like if you have a short sleeve sweater and you're casting off the sleeve and it's sitting right up there on your arm, a lot of stretchy bind offs, like say the Jenny's very stretchy one, what'll happen is it'll actually cause the fabric to ripple because there's too much going on in the bind off and it's got too much ease, so it can be unattractive. So this particular bind off, which is super simple, is also really, really versatile and gives you a lot of ease for places like that. If this was something where your shawl was going to have to be stretched out even more, that's where you'd want to go to a more stretchy bind off. But for this particular one, this would actually be a really good option if you don't like doing Pico. And so for that, I'll just repeat what I did, which is really easy. You would start off by casting off 2 stitches, just like we did here. Yeah, I've used it for sock cuffs, definitely. Come back here, you. And then you just knit 2 together through the back loop and put the stitch on the left-hand needle again. Should have gotten different needles for this. Why I didn't put a longer cable on, I don't know. But one of the things too that this is nice for is if you don't have to worry about it being super elastic, just stretchy, it is super fast. It's almost as fast as knitting when you get into it. So if you have a Stephen West shawl where that rascally man has given you 1,000 stitches to bind off, this one is a delight. If he has decided to give you picots or I-cord, then you will shake your fist at him and possibly change the bind off because you don't want to go through that horror. So are there any questions about binding off your shawls? No? Okay, great. Well, why don't we do our gnome kit giveaway, and then we can do some show and tell. So Heather is going to draw from the participants in the Zoom right now, and then she will announce the winner. And what you will do is you are going to email sales@ancientartsfiber.com, which will reach the wonderful Wendy, and she will arrange to get your prize to you.
All right, so I have Catherine Otley as the winner.
Congratulations, Catherine. So you're going to want to make sure to email us after this event, and we will arrange to get a delightful gnome kit to you. If you are not interested in knitting a delicious gnome, that's fine, because what it gives you is a lovely set of mini skeins, and there are a lot of other things that obviously we can use mini skeins for. But it would be quite nice to participate in the KAL, and Wendy, we will arrange to get a pattern copy as well. So we will purchase the pattern for you so that it's a complete kit. So I'll just make a little note of that. So yay, congratulations, Catherine. So I'm going to begin show and tell while you guys start getting ready and, you know, clicking your hands so that you can do some show and tell. And I am going to admit, for those of you who are worried, that I have not actually gotten very far with my shawl. That doesn't mean that I am not eligible. Okay, fine, I donated the prize, so it's not much of an excitement for me. But, you know, if this was you, you would not be worried about being eligible for a prize, because you would still get one, even if you only have this much done. All you needed to do to be eligible was to actually sign up for the KAL, and Interweave has a record of your name and email, and they will gladly be letting you know if you're a winner. The reason why I am not as far along in my shawl as I needed to be is that I am knitting a bunch of super secret things that Carrie will, you know, like shake her fist at me if I reveal, so I cannot, but that has slowed me down. However, I am finding it's a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying the contrast between the colors in here. So I chose the purple kit, and I'll actually be adding in pink instead of the other purple in there when I get to the next section. And I really like the way that you see all sorts of different things popping up in the stitches. So the somewhat reduced contrast, because I've got dark purple against a variegated purple, is meaning that sometimes the slip stitches show up. So if you see on this side, there's little V's, and sometimes the stitches that you normally see, like in Wendy's, are showing more. So it was kind of like, ooh, there's a really interesting sort of almost ghostly effect happening here. So if you are somebody who chose variegated colors, you'll get that effect. And if you're somebody who didn't but want to knit the shawl again and have some fun with it the next time, then putting a really variegated yarn with a little less contrast in there can give you some really funky effects in the slip stitch. So when we built these kits, I kind of had an idea it would do that, and I'm like super happy to see it happening. So I thought that was really fun, and I had to show you this. All righty, so Dan, if you want to go to our first person who is going to volunteer to show off their shawls, that would be great.
I've got Sylvia.
Hi. So mine is somewhat similar to the original colors, but instead of a pink variegated, I've ended up with it's actually a combo. It's a variegated blue and some fine lace and green. So it creates a sort of green effect.
That is very cool. I love that.
And I've gotten to the halfway number of rows, which if I calculate correctly means I'm 1/4 done the number of knitting stitches. Loving doing it.
I felt all good at mine. I was like, you know, like, oh, I've got so many rows to, oh dear.
Really enjoying it. It's great fun.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. So do we have another person who would like to share their shawl? Come on, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely I can. I can you hear me? I have my okay. I was just I'm on the end of a row, so just give me 2 seconds. I have 2 stitches to stitch. So I was like, oh, Caroline will call on me, which you of course have done. All right, well, let me just, as I juggle my yarn here and adjust myself a little bit in my oversized chair. So I'm like highlighted even. I'm Stephanie, and I'm Caroline's assistant dyer at Ancient Arts, and I decided to go with singles actually for my shawl, and I'm using one of our colorways here. Don't mind my dyed up hands. The colorful blue and red is our Fireworks.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying okay?
That is correct.
All right, I was like, Is that the name? And then the yellow is Dear Little Buttercup, which is one of my favorite yellows that we dye. It's so springy. And then I'm also using, it's kind of a little bit lost in the yellow, but I'm using Creme de la Creme as my other color. And yeah, so I've gotten through almost all of the repeats, where all of the colors show up in the different types, in the different like sort of blocks, or, you know, color blocks. So that is my shawl. I'm very much enjoying primary color combinations right now. So that's the reason why I decided to go with these colors. So I'm enjoying this shawl so much. I don't typically knit things more than once, but I might actually knit this again and knit it in the Passion 8, because now that I've seen Wendy's finished, the texture is just a little bit different than using the singles. The singles are going to be lovely and drapey and beautiful, but the Passion 8 is also going to give a little bit of a different texture.
Well, that's very fun. Thank you so much. So if you want to go to the next person, Dan.
I've got our good friend Tanya.
So you'll have to unmute.
Tanya,
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. So I can't show you physically the shawl because I'm on my cell phone right now. But what I did do was I had taken a picture of it about an hour ago and popped it in as the background on my hi. So anyways, the colors I've chosen, same as yours, Caroline, Kismet, Lupins, and I've got the Tiny Orchid to finish it off with. Almost done. And I tell you, you can ask Karen, but I've been texting her so much saying, oh my God, I'm on my last 2 rows of star stitches. I can't wait.
Well, that's fantastic. It's beautiful, Tanya, and I really like your substitution of the Tiny Orchid. So the original used a color called House Orchid, and Tiny Orchid is a little bit more delicate, and then it has teeny little speckles. So it's really worked out very pretty, and I love the contrast that you've got as a result. So very fun. I've been admiring it, you know, behind you. I can see people obviously on the gallery, and I've been thinking it's very pretty.
So I think it'll be finished tonight later on, though.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
next up, we've got Karen. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm not as far along as I was hoping I would be, but I am on the second go through. So I have the dark blue I have is looking fine in my new blue jeans 4. My variegated is Picnic, and then I have the kind of creamy yellow is Golden Retriever.
Well, that's gorgeous.
And
That
I
is a
love the wrong
combination.
side. It is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's funny because in all the pictures in the pattern, they never show the wrong side. And I kind of wish they would, because it is so interesting.
It is. It's really pretty.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that is lovely. And you are way ahead of me, way like, you know, like last. And I'm trying to use the excuse of knitting other things, but we all know that that's nonsense. It's
I feel like a failure compared to Wendy and Tanya, but you know, what can I do?
Hey, just remember this. Okay, so I'm still seeing some more hands if you want to move to the next person, Dan, and thank you, Karen.
It's Wendy's turn again.
I would just like to, can you hear me? I would just like to point out how much this shawl grows when you block it. We looked at Tanya's and we looked at Karen's, and I saw a post on the interweave forum today about some of the knitters were very concerned that the star stitch didn't seem to have the spaces in between the stitches.
Oh, it does.
Oh, trust me, when you block it, they'll pop out and look like that. It looks fantastic.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, do we have any more hands? I think we do.
Next up, we've got Judy.
Okay, mine is the original #1 combo. So it's coming right along. I love it.
Well, it's beautiful, so nicely knit.
So I'm in the second go around, almost finished the star section. So it's still got a ways to go. I love it. My one question is the Passion 8 only in sport weight? Is that what it is?
So what it is actually it straddles categories. It can be classed as a heavy fingering weight yarn, and it can be classed as a sport weight, depending on what you're knitting. And truth be told, depending on the wool that the mill has used, because I've noticed that it can change from year to year a little bit. Sheep will grow different wool each year. They have different, the climate that year is different, the food is different, whatever. So sometimes it's a little bit more springy than other years. And that puts it straddling that category. We only have it in that one weight because of the way that it's spun, and because we got it initially because it was Canadian made and good for socks and things like that.
Okay.
But something that I would love to get at some point in time would be to have something like this that's heavier.
Because I really love the antique colorway. I was thinking I'd like to do a jumper or sweater. So I've been looking on the website, but I wasn't sure if that was the one that I'm using right now. So it's only in one weight, is that right?
It's only in one weight, but the colorway dyes really, really the same on pretty much all the bases. So I can highly recommend soft DK. It will keep the same kind of color. You can get the merino DK, which is a light worsted as well. And you could go for a heavier yarn if you want and have it dye on the revival worsted. So it all depends on the sweater that you choose.
Okay. But you just choose the antique colorway.
Yep.
And in any weight, is that it?
So the only one that you wouldn't be able to go for is any of the last go bases, because they're naturally colored. So if we dyed antique on it, it would look very different. But the rest, yeah, you'd be able to get something that would be
Well,
great.
the antique is really lovely, the way the color comes out in it. I love it.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad you love it. And thank you for your shawl.
Thank you.
It's Kelly's turn.
Hi there. So I started mine early, that's why mine's finished. But I have a question about blocking. Like, I'm pretty new to knitting. Typically, I don't block things, but then seeing how the shawls look after blocking, like if I don't have blocking things, is there like tips or tricks or anything to get it blocked?
Totally. So what I've shared here is
okay.
because she took a photo of it while it's being blocked. Now she is using something called blocking wires here, which mean that you weave them through the edge of the item that you're blocking, and they just help you to keep it straight, and you need less pins. What I find, if you want something to come out nice and straight, is that the wires will make a big difference, but not all of us have access to a store with wires or want to invest in them. So then what I would suggest is more pins is more. You can get your edge a lot straighter by using extra pins. And the mats that Wendy's using, you can get those at places like IKEA, and you can get sets of them in 6s, and they come in all sorts of colors. And they last forever. Even if small felines glaring at the one lying on the floor beside me decide to use them to sharpen their claws on. So they're really, really great for holding your knitting, and you can move those mats around in different shapes and sizes. For pins, the best ones are T-pins, and you can find those all over the place. You can find them online. You can find them at any craft store because they're so versatile and beautiful. On the bottom edge, especially if you didn't have a blocking wire, then what you would do is put one in each picot, and that'll hold the edge stable. So the more you put pins in along an edge, the better you can stretch the shawl out. And then on that subject too, when you go to block, I read something again today online, and it said, soak your item for 30 minutes. Well, you don't actually need to soak it for 30 minutes. The only thing is that it needs to be in water if you're wet blocking long enough to actually absorb the water and get wet. So a hand dyed yarn, for example, is going to get wet within about 2-3 minutes. And so you don't have to stand there watching your shawl and praying that, nothing happens to the color. Just get it wet, roll it in some towels, and now you're ready to lay it out. One of the things that helps me a lot is just to have a cheap yardstick or meter stick, depending on what country you live in. And that'll help you to measure out different parts of the shawl to make sure that you're doing it symmetrically. So if you have one of those triangle wing shawls, you can measure each from the center out, or you can use it if you're using pins just to keep your edge straight. So if you don't have wires, just use a yardstick in order to help you keep things straight.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And I
You're welcome.
realized that I think I bound it off incorrectly. I had a question in the interweave and got some assistance, but I did, yeah, when you bind off 2, I knit 3 stitches and bound off 2, and then the 4 I knit 5 and bound off. It still came out okay. It's just not as pronounced as far as like an edging goes, but yeah.
What that did was it just spaced your picos out more, and it's completely legitimate to do that, because if you look at Pico Bind Offs on lots of different patterns, nobody does it the same. We'll all space it out differently. And I've used Pico Bind Offs on multiple of my designs, and I didn't space them the same either.
Okay.
So it looks quite nice. And, you know, really when you're wearing it, that Pico Bind Off, the way that it's written, is not super noticeable anyway.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for showing your beautiful shawl. So we have another person, Dan.
We have another Judy.
Hi, I just wanted to show this because I called in and Wendy very nicely helped me with my color choices. So yeah, that's the wrong way. I love the star stitch, and I'm just finishing off the first round, and the colors are the colorways are Stash Me, and that was this one, Stash Me, and then Sierra by Moonlight and Iced Coffee.
Nice.
Yeah, I wanted something. I tend to go with blues all the time. Blue, but almost all the shawls I've made are blues, teals, and purples. So I wanted something different, and so I wanted burgundy, and then these two worked well with it. Yeah.
Well, I think that the two of you together make a great team on picking colors, because that's gorgeous.
Yeah, I was really, that's why I wanted to say, because Wendy, I had a different speckled one, and Wendy suggested this would show up better, and I would really appreciated it, because I'm really quite happy with this end of it, where you can really see the star stitches.
Well, that's super fun.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So do we have anything else you want to share? I think we do.
We have Kelly's iPad.
Hi, I actually had a question for you. So when I looked through my stash, the only colorway I had of the yarn that you suggested for this pattern was in the Australian Shepherd colorway from that fundraiser you did a few years ago.
Yep.
And I was just wondering what colors you would recommend to go with that.
So Australian Shepherd is an interesting one. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's actually dyed half the skein is a blue marl, like the dogs. And then there is 2 stripes of a golden brown on it. And then there is a nice big long section of white. So what that means is that that colorway can do some serious patterning and pooling. But in a shawl like this with the star stitch, that's actually a really fun option in order to kind of do a little bit of controlling of that color. So what it really is dyed with basically neutrals, and really it would be friends with anything and everything. So what I would do when pairing it up with something is I would pick a color family first that you enjoy. So in my case, I tend to gravitate blues, so you could definitely pair it up with a blue. And then from there, what you're going to do is decide, do you want a dark blue, a light blue? Once you've decided that, then you have to pick your third color, and you'll want something that doesn't look like the others. So you'd pick a third color that will be contrasting. So if you went with a dark blue, you'd pick a lighter color. And if you went with a light blue, you'd pick a dark color, but you don't want them to be gray or white or brown or blue, because then they get lost in there. Now, if you don't mind some of that and you just want things to peek out, then you're okay. But if you want to be able to see all 3 and let them all speak equally, then you'll definitely want to pick something that would be different. So I hope that helped.
No, the third color is always the trickiest part.
True. And you know, one of the things that I always cheat with, you know, when I'm sitting there and I'm like, I frantically want to cast on and I'm super excited about something is, like I say, go for your passion color that you really enjoy. And then if need be, pick a neutral. But in this case, what you could do would be to move to a different type of neutral. So something that's not going to fight with them, but that might be harmonious. So you would have in this case, in just this example, so you've got gray, brown, and blue, which all kind of act as neutrals. But what's something that harmonizes with those? Well, something that's not going to color contrast. That's where you'd start thinking about it. And one of the ways to go with it, it's not really a neutral, but you can't go wrong when you work with primary colors. So one of the reasons why Stephanie's shawl is so pretty is because she's working with primaries. So at that point in time, you could pick a pink. So that's one way to work the colors there.
I
So-
could show mine.
Yes. If you want to spotlight Heather.
Sorry, who is I spotlighting?
Heather.
Oh, Heather, yeah.
So I kind of have the advantage of I have all the yarn that's behind Caroline. I get to kind of play and mix colors and all that good stuff. And so Islands on the Sea, which is in the first kit, was on the table. And then I really like the color Pop Rocks. So I put Islands of the Sea and Pop Rocks in there. But then I couldn't figure out, Caroline and Emma and I were in the production room trying to come up with the third color. And then the third color came to us. I think it was Caroline that suggested it was Fizz. And so I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm calling it my Girls Just Want to Have Fun shawl, because it's kind of that retro 80s pop rocks, bright tealy blue, and then this crazy pinky greeny color. So it's been really fun to knit.
Well, thank you, Heather. And that actually, it goes back to the same question, because Pop Rock has a gray background with some black speckles and then some smaller amounts of multiple colors. So when you do that, it's like, well, where do I go next? So Heather picked the teal color that is near and dear to her heart. And then we wanted to say, all right, well, what are we going to put with it? And this is where we picked something that is harmonious, but it goes back to some simple color theory in terms of when you look at the color wheel and what is across the color wheel or what is adjacent on the color wheel. So again, with Australian Shepherd, that's one of the things that you can do is either pick up on one of those colors and play off of it, or you can go and look at, you know, we've got two. Let's look at a color wheel, and there's tons of online resources for this that'll pick colors. There's websites that you can get, just Google, you know, choosing colors or something like that. And you can plug in two colors and it'll suggest a third one for you. So that's another little sneaky thing that you can do when you're, you know, lurking in the production room and they don't know what you're up to in the middle of your choosing colors. Might have done that a few times. So I hope that helps, Kelly. And, you know, do feel free to contact us for more brainstorming in terms of putting something together with those colors. So do we have anybody else who is ready to share a shawl, or should we move on to a little bit of styling this shawl? Yes, there should be a recording of the first Zoom meeting, Tiffany, and it should be on our YouTube channel. If you can't find it, then we will consult with higher Daniel type authorities and make sure that it is posted there. But yeah, you can always go back and you can refer to it. And Kelly, your hand has gone up again. Is that intentional? Okay, good.
Sorry, I forgot to show you my shawl.
Oh, cool. Okay. If you can spotlight Kelly again, Dan.
All right, so I use the variegated color as my main color, and then I've pulled the colors from the variegation into each section. So it's been fun getting to each section because I get to change it up so much. So there's where I'm at.
It's gorgeous.
I'm a little backlit, so I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but
It's pretty decent. The only trick is when you're on a Zoom and you're wanting to show something is hold it still so the camera has time to focus. There you go.
okay. So
Yeah, super pretty. Nice.
yeah, I love how the variegated really does change it up, you know. That's why I was wondering if the Australian Shepherd, if I could come up with two other colors that would, you know, play with the Australian Shepherd, it might be really fun.
Well, you can definitely do that. And one of the glorious things, because it is dyed with neutrals, is that you can put pretty much anything with it and it's going to rock. And I think that Australian Shepherd would be really, really cool in the star stitch, because that's where you get these really patterning yarns showing at their best. Because something that we don't always tell you is that the lupins that's in here is actually dyed in sections of color, and it's actually going to behave very much like Australian Shepherd. So what you see it doing in this one is going to happen when you knit Australian Shepherd in your shawl. So there's going to be lots of flash and dazzle and, you know, interesting movement of color there for sure.
Well, I bought a whole bunch of it, so I have plenty to work with.
Thank you for supporting the fundraiser, and I'm glad that we can help you to use it. There's some really interesting, I don't know if you can use Ravelry or not everybody can, but if you go to Ravelry and you actually do a search on Socknado, because that's the base that has the most projects there, you'll see a lot of projects that are done with Australian Shepherd. So you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like in both knitting and crochet. There's a lot of projects on there that I would like to steal personally. So I think that it could be kind of edifying to look.
Down in the chat, there's a Judy Neidenberg. Sorry if I've said your name wrong. She's had her hand up, and I think she's just had it like up in the camera. Can we spotlight her so she can show us her shawl?
Oops.
Can't find me.
Sorry, which Judy was this again? Sorry.
Neidenberg.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay, just hang on one second. Found her. There you go.
Okay. I used the original colorway, and I think I've made a mistake on the slip stitch part. And so I didn't get very far, because when I realized it and I ripped it out and tried to do it again, I was getting the same thing. I wonder if you can look at that and tell me, do I have the thread on the wrong side when I'm doing that?
So you're going to get a little thing on the front side that looks like kind of a little X with a dash in the middle of it. Can you see that on mine? Well, on Wendy's beautiful shawl.
Wait, no, I can't. Oh, wait.
I think, Judy, try holding your yarn in the back when you slip the stitch.
Yeah, because that's the other thing is here's the back side. And so you can see the two slips there. So the yarn is always in the back on the slip, and what'll form the little Xy thing on the front, you figure it's not going to work, but it comes up once you've completed the rows. And then you see these longer pink stitches here. That's the stitch that got slipped, because it'll be slipped twice in a row.
Right.
Well, it'll slip twice, one row and then back. And so it elongates that stitch.
I will try it again.
Yeah. And if you have trouble, you can either consult in the forum there on Interweave Plus, or you can always just drop us a note and I'll be happy to help you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Do we have anyone who wants to do show and tell that we have not caught yet? Don't think so. So the last but not least subject that we thought would be really fun would be a little bit of styling your beautiful shawls once they are finished, because each shape will have ways that you can wear them. So some of the ways that, you can actually, by the way, do searches on this to see photos of how people have done them in the past. And that can be very handy if you're not a big shawl person, but you want to do something with it. But I came up with a list of the kinds of things that I really like to do with them and that will work with this particular shape. Some of them are going to look better on different body types and sometimes different age groups. So for example, one of the ones that's kind of interesting and super stylish right now, and that you're actually seeing a lot on fashion runways, is you drape the shawl around your shoulders, let it hang down the front, and then you belt it. So it's actually super comfy that way and it stays in place. But as a somewhat larger lady with a significant bust, I don't think that would be terribly flattering for me. But I wanted to give a lot of suggestions on this, because then you can pick the things that you like yourself. So one of the most common ways to wear a triangular shawl is just to wear it like a scarf. And you can put it around your neck in all sorts of ways. So you can start from the thin end, and then you can wind it around your neck, and then you have another thin end, and now you've got this lovely, nice, thick, warm donut on your neck. That's a really good way to wear it. And you can see those two different ends on this particular triangular shawl. And it's quite a nice effect. So let me stand up in front of the camera and show you that. So that's the simplest way to do it, is just start from the thin end of your shawl, put it across your shoulders and wind around your neck. I see a lot of the young folk these days, and they do a really cool way of wearing their shawls that I never saw in my youth, but I really like and I do myself. And that is to take the shawl, take your bottom point and put it roughly in front of you, and then wrap the two ends around your neck. And it's almost kerchief style in this case. So you see how it comes out a little bit different, and you can tuck that end underneath, you can pull it out in front, on top, whatever. There's lots of different things telling you about how incredibly fashionable it is either to put this over like I have or under. It does not matter, just wear it the way you like. But what this does is it gives you a nice long point in front. And if it's winter and you have a coat with a V-neck like mine, then this fills that area in really beautifully. And it's really easy to arrange, to adjust, spread it out over your shoulders a little bit, and so on. So the simplest way to wear these triangle shawls is just to wear them as a scarf around your neck. Another way that you can wear them is to take that nice point, which is one of your bottom points, and you can put it on your shoulder. So you throw it over your shoulder. I guess I could stand up for this. And then again, you can just flip it over. And now you have a shawl that's going to stay in place. So this is actually really stable. If you do find that the coat or the shirt that you're wearing it with slips a lot, you can use something called a shawl cuff. And Wendy has kindly shared with me her cuff. And what that is it's a band that you just simply snap around your shawl and it will hold it in place. And this one is a little bit tangled in my hair, but these are really, okay, I can't make it work because it's trying to grab my hair. You have the band, and if you have actually snapped it correctly, then when you wear the shawl, again, it stays put, it's not going to go anywhere. And there's some really, really gorgeous ones of these. They're called shawl cuffs, and Knox Mountain Co. does these, and they're absolutely fabulous. They're upcycled, beautiful leather, very decorative, and they're really fun to put on your shawls because they're kind of like putting jewelry on there. There are other companies too that will do this sort of thing, and you can end up with a really nice collection. So this is just kind of a start on wearing them. Another way to wear them is that you can put them into a really longer loop. So I've done this in the past where I'll let it hang down and I'll just give it a little tie in the back. Come on, you. See, this is the problem with not having cut my hair in 2 years. It's getting in my way, but this can be really comfy because again, it puts warmth in different places and you can put it over your shoulder or you can put it in the back, but these tend to stay placed if you haven't tangled your hair in there. So all of these work with an asymmetric triangle. Again, you can do various different types of knotting, so you can throw it over your shoulder, and if you don't have a shawl cuff, then you can just tie it in a nice little knot. There is the classic way that I learned to wear these about 45 years ago now, and that is just take the shawl lengthwise and flip it over your shoulders and wear it like that. So it's a nice wrap. Sometimes asymmetric shawls will be prone to, okay, they slide to one side and they don't want to stay on. You can give it a little bit of help on the thin end by actually tying this into a little loose knot. So if you're really long, skinny one, if you knot one end, it pulls it up and then it actually gives you a little bit of weight to keep the shawl in place. So I'll do this quite a bit with, for example, really big asymmetric shawls like Find Your Fade is I'll knot the ends. So you can do that and it helps to keep the shawl from sliding backwards over your shoulders. Let's see, some other ways that the slender generation will tend to do, well, not generation, but slender build will tend to do is that you can wrap this around in a crisscross fashion. So you put it over your shoulders, cross it over your chest and tie it behind you. I am not a slender person, so I cannot actually do that, but it is a super cozy way of wearing shawls. And if you remember at the beginning when I was showing you different shapes, it's particularly popular with those long, narrow shawls, but an asymmetric triangle also translates quite well into doing that. And you can get some really interesting asymmetry in terms of how you're wearing it too, which is extremely stylish these days, or so the fashion runways would have us understand. Another device, if you don't want to get a shawl cuff, good Lord, it doesn't want to come out. It's childproof. Another device that you'll see, and you can get these at fiber festivals, you can buy them online, and they can be either fancier or simpler, is a shawl pin. And these are really useful for asymmetric shawls. So if I was to put this shawl, and I won't just want to keep on wearing this and run away with it, and Wendy's going to have words with me about that. But again, throw it over your shoulder, grab the two ends, you can fold them over each other, and then you can use a pin to hold these in place. And with the star stitch, it's really easy to just feed the pin through. And then you have a decorative pin that holds it in place, and it's easy to take off, but it gives you that nice drape where you can show off all your beautiful star stitch sections. This one comes with a ring, and if you have a very thin shawl, like made out of lace yarn, sometimes the ring can be handy, because what you'll do is pull a little bit of the shawl up through the ring and then stick the pin through it. So it's kind of a neat style, and this is actually super ancient. So the Romans were really big on shawl pins like this, and they find a lot of them archaeologically. So shawl pins will really help you in these various methods of styling if, like me, and you've got the long hair or you have different shoulder shapes and you find them falling off. One of the things that is a sad fact of my life is I have very narrow shoulders. So shawl pins and shawl cuffs, yeah, baby, as well as just simply tying them in a knot. This is really comfy. So like I say, one of the really fun things to do is if you want to, be like young and cool and wear a belt, and you can be young and cool and wear a belt at any age, is again, just drape it over your shoulders. And this one is long enough that you can belt it on. And that is just, like I say, so cozy. When I was younger, I used to do that all the time because I had a waist back then. Now it's sort of more not there. Let's see if I have anything else to say. Oh yeah, and if you really are curious, Google how to wear a shawl and have a look at some of the things that come up, because they're incredibly clever these days. So people will fold big asymmetric triangles like this into all sorts of styles. Like I say, young ladies will gather them in the front and wear them as a top, and they can also be wrapped into dresses too. So there's a lot of creative ways to wear these. And I think all of you ladies will look amazing in all of these additional styles. It's just unfortunate that, I don't quite have the figure for that right now. So do we have any questions about styling shawls? I do know that Interweave is going to be putting some more information about that too. I will say that, having been flamboyantly flaunting Wendy's shawl, I'm really impressed with the way that the star stitch feels when you wear it. It's really quite lovely. And I can tell that for ladies like me of a certain climate zone, it's going to be great because it's breathing really, really well. So I found it a really nice, cozy, warm weight around my shoulders, but it was also breathing and I was not having any heat issues. So yay. So I think that brings us to actually the end of what we had planned for our KAL. And we are a little bit over in terms of Zoom time. So I do want to thank everybody who has stuck with us right to the end, and everybody who has joined us and shared their shawls. We really appreciate it. And we're so glad to see that you're enjoying it. And, you're going to have something pretty at the end. Before we sign off, are there any further questions that we can help you with? Not hearing anything. So at this point, then I will wish you all happy knitting, and I look forward to seeing more of your shawls. Oh, wait a minute. We've got Kelly. Yay.
Is this the last Zoom meeting though?
This is the last Zoom meeting. So what we did was we set one up in the first week and then the third week so that we could get you prepared for, further things with shawls. What will happen is that there will be one more newsletter coming out from Interweave for the 4th week, and then Interweave will be doing the draw for the prizes. And there are some pretty juicy prizes on there, and I'm really annoyed that I'm not eligible to win them because there's some lovely needle sets and things involved. So any other questions?
Thank you very much. It's been very informative.
Oh, you're very welcome. I do have a lot of fun with these, so I'm really glad that we could set this up and spend some time together, because let's face it, one of the joyous parts of a KAL is the socializing and the seeing all the pretty things and knowing that I am now the slowest one in the entire KAL out of 3,500 people.
No, you're not.
Well, that's kind of you to say. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Caroline.
You're very
Bye-bye.
welcome.